All right, football fans, welcome to a Thursday episode of the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Smith, here at the Fans First Sports Network. We're doing our State of the Franchise show, which we've now begun to run regularly on Thursdays. Today, our focus is on the Washington Commanders, exciting football team in the NFL, up-and-coming team. And to break down the Commanders with me from FFSN's Washington Football Weekly, Will Kramer. Will, welcome aboard.
Hey, Kevin. How you doing? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Appreciate you coming on. Excited to talk about your team because there's a lot of positive vibes surrounding them now. But before we get to that, man, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you had the misfortune of attending college with Jeff Hartman, so I'm sorry you had to endure that. But other than that, man, how did we arrive here?
Dude, not only did I attend college, I played on the club lacrosse team with him. So I had to have practice with Jeff. Yeah. And if you know anything about him, which I'm sure you do, he's a hard worker. So if you're not up to his level.
He strikes me as an uber competitive guy.
Yeah. You got to reach his level. And by the time I hit college and playing a club sport, I wasn't really at that level anymore. So yeah, no, it was fun though. Jeff's a good guy. So real excited to be on this. I've seen your shows and some of your clips and stuff. So it was real exciting to get a chance to connect with you. Washington Football Weekly has been going for 5 years now. We just started, I guess, our 5th year. We kind of break them up into off season is one schedule, regular season is the second season. So we kind of break it up that way. It's a friend of mine from high school. And his name's Sean Spencer, and he runs another thing called Let's Talk Football. And he had a show that they do that every Mondays of like recapping the weekend. And he reached out to me and said, "Will, you want to talk Commanders?" Well, let's see. At that time, we were the Washington football team. So he was like, "You want to talk football team with me?" And it was just like we connected back like we were in high school. And so we've just been, running it. And we have a real good time on Wednesday nights. Breaking down how the game went. We like to say we're realistic but optimistic fans. We think our team's going to win about 10 or 11 games a year, but we will recognize when we're not going to win a game, when we have to go up to Philly, those types of games. But yes, we've been doing that for about 5 years now. You mentioned it already, Washington Football Weekly. You can find us on X at WashFB Weekly. And we have a good time chopping it up, and we're thrilled to be part of Fans First Sports Network because we want to talk with other fans, and we were able to do that for the Detroit game, and really get to hear the guys from up there, their thoughts and stuff. And so it's been a lot of fun to be part of this network.
Excellent. Just not for anything, but I was a big fan of the name Washington Football Team. It had, gosh. I hear you rolling your eyes, and I don't know, man. It had for me a uniqueness about it, just calling them the football team.
So there's been a lot of talk of people who would just rather than be Washington. The problem I had with it was because the networks, because in their slots they have to have a nickname. It would be Dallas versus football team. And that's what I couldn't take that. I'm like, we got to, even though Commanders is awful, I was like, just give us something, some type of nickname. And now I regret Commanders.
That's funny. Dallas versus football team. All right. Well, let's talk about how we've arrived where we are, because I don't know how old you are, Will, but I'm guessing Washington has not been very good for the vast majority of your life. They were a mini dynasty under Joe Gibbs in the 80s, but from 1993 to 2023, which is basically 3 decades of football, they had just 8 winning seasons. They won just 2 playoff games. The vast majority of that was the Daniel Snyder era. I think people are pretty aware that the Daniel Snyder era was rough. How rough was it?
Yeah, it was so bad. I still remember the 91 team and that season, and that was magical. And you had an owner and a general manager and a coach that all got along. And for 30 years, those 20 years with Snyder, that was just not the case. Some of the stories, everyone understands the bullying of employees, the sexual harassment allegations that ultimately led to him selling the team. But some of the stuff that he did is just awful. And you wonder and question, how was he successful in business being the type of leader and manager that he was? For example, with their defensive coordinator, you know this name, Mike Nolan. been around the league a long time. He didn't have a good defense when he was in DC under Norv Turner. But at one point, he also didn't have great personnel. He came back from a game on Monday morning, and there was a huge tub of ice cream that had melted on his desk with the note, "I like my ice cream vanilla, but not my defenses. Fix this." It's like, how can you treat somebody, one of your employees, that way? One of the biggest mistakes he made was when he fired Marty Schottenheimer, because Marty didn't placate to him. He didn't call him Mr. Snyder. Marty removed the ownership parking spots right up next to the field so that all of Snyder and his friends could come sit and park right next to the end zone during practice and watch it. And, Marty went 8-3 in his final 11 games with Tony Banks as a quarterback. And look what he did in San Diego. He would have turned the Skins franchise around because that's what he did. But, there was times during his ownership you thought, he's getting it. He's young, but he's getting it. He brought in some coaches that all fans were excited about. We were excited about Marty Schottenheimer, but even then more excited about Steve Spurrier. Then we got excited about Joe Gibbs and then Mike Shanahan. So there was a lot of times with the coaching staff, the ideas that he had to bring in, you could get on board and be like, okay, well, maybe the fact that we've got a professional in the building, Snyder will walk away. But the amount of times that he manipulated the roster and jeopardized it, from the standpoint of they go 10-6 with Norv Turner, and then he goes out and signs Jeff George to come in and be a backup, who we all know is a locker room killer. And that team was terrible, and Norv Turner got fired. When RG3 came in, everybody loved him, but the owner allowed for a RG3, a quarterback, to go right into his office on all the complaints. So when he tore his ACL and came back in 2013, he told the coaches, no more read option. I'm not doing it. And the owner said to Mike and Kyle Shanahan, you're not running the read option anymore. You need to make him a drop back passer. And they said to Robert, you're not ready for this. Are you sure you want to do this? And he wasn't. 2013 was bad. 2014 was bad. And then he got hurt and he never, played for the Skins again. And the last one with Dwayne Haskins, our scouting department said he's not a first round pick. We're willing to draft him, but not in the first round. And the owner said, he went to high school with my son. He's from DC. He's our draft pick. Turn it in. And they were like yelling at him on draft day in the draft room as the clock is ticking. And Snyder said, turn it in. This is who we're drafting. So it was just like he just made so many decisions that undermined his coaches. There was no chance for any success.
Think about some of the names you just mentioned: Marty Schottenheimer, Mike Shanahan, Steve Spurrier, Joe Gibbs, even Norv Turner. Those guys were phenomenally successful everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So what's the common denominator? Obviously.
Right.
And I think those are great examples you just gave. I think people on the outside understand big picture that it was bad, but when you get to the pettiness that you're talking about right now, and you combine it with the other dysfunction, then that is obviously a long and frustrating journey. But Good news, of course, that chapter appears to be closed. You've got a new ownership group, you got a new head coach, and you obviously have a very exciting new quarterback. What was 2024 like by contrast after all those Snyder years?
It was magical. I just sat on the couch and I would get excited during the games, but it was more just sitting there going like, is this real? Is this happening? Not just the Hail Mary play, but just every game. Like, is this our team? Because it's just, that's not what we're used to. We're used to, December, swoops where they decline and they don't make the playoffs, or, they barely miss the playoffs, or just by November, they're out of it. I always use the phrase, I take it from the Lexus commercials. I just want to have a December to remember in my NFL season, because as you alluded to, for 25 years, we haven't been good. And last season was just a lot of fun. And it surprised everybody, but we also had a feeling that they were setting themselves up in the right direction. The ownership group is all from DC. Josh Harris grew up in DC going to Skins games. His, next partner, next largest investor, Mitchell Rales, started the first sports radio network in DC. The other guy, Mark Ine, started a tennis tournament, a professional tennis tournament in DC. So these guys understood business. They became wealthy through their ties to DC. So you knew they were smart business owners. Like the idea that they're going to be bringing the team back to DC at the RFK site. That was kind of the type of stuff you anticipated. But when they brought in Adam Peters, you thought, okay, a really smart personnel guy wants to come here. We're not used to that. And then he came in and, no one was really on board with Dan Quinn. That was not anybody's first choice. They all thought it was going to be Ben Johnson, which makes sense. You have the number 2 overall pick. He's an offensive guy. Like that it's a marriage. It just seems to be a good marriage. So people were a little bit concerned about Dan Quinn, but you could also just have the faith in Adam Peters, being the fact that he was in San Francisco and Denver and New England and seeing how they run. And then they were just very methodical in their choices. They brought in Bobby Wagner to be a culture changer. They brought in Zach Ertz to help the offense, and he worked out. They waited to the 3rd round to draft a left tackle after selecting a rookie quarterback at 2. You're like, you got a little nervous during the season, but then you just kind of say, these guys know what they're doing. And so you just kind of step back and let professionals be professionals. And, each game was fun, and they were in most of the games that they were in, minus, I guess, the championship game. And so it really was a magical season. It was just a fun ride to be on.
Yeah. And they've made some smart moves this offseason too, continuing to add veterans. The Laramie Tunsil trade, I think, is phenomenal for Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course they go with another offensive lineman in the 1st round. So now it appears they're going to try to bolster that unit in front of Jaden Daniels. The Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury marriage, I think from a schematic perspective, given Kingsbury's history in working with guys like Mahomes and Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray, and now he's got another dual threat, so to speak, quarterback in Daniels. I think that's a smart marriage. Mm-hmm. So here's my question. It doesn't feel like 2024 was an outlier. It feels like Washington is really built now to be in this conversation, this championship conversation for the next couple of years. Not trying to jinx the franchise or anything like that, but is that a fair statement?
You're going a little further than I think we're ready to, because partly this roster is still being retooled. When Adam Peters had his press conference, he got asked, tell us about some of the building blocks that you see in-house. And he paused for 2 seconds, and then he sighed, and then he answered the question. So that was a pretty clear indication that he didn't see a lot of talent in the building. And so he's been trying to remake it, with really Terry McLaurin is the only guy that you can really say, like, you can start a franchise with this guy, and you can compare him with most other receivers as a top guy. But so they're still working on improving the roster. So that's where I say they're going to be competitive. My thought right now, when we did a quick little look at the schedule, was 9-8, 10-7, because they have to go play the NFC North and they have to play the AFC West. And so those are some tough games that they're going to be going up against. Plus you really don't know in the NFC East team to team. The Giants have been awful, but they're also one of the NFL's favorite foundation franchises. So you never really know when they're going to have their spike and let it hit. The Cowboys, every other year, they could be playoff contenders or they could be in last place. You really just don't know with them. So they're going to have a difficult schedule, but they are certainly in the mix as a exciting team. Jaden is, like you said, he's just a really exciting player to watch. He's ascending. He works hard. He's someone you can root for. So I think they're on the right track, but I wouldn't say that they're a Super Bowl contender next year. The roster still needs to be worked on.
Interesting. What do they need roster-wise then to close the gap with Philly? Because if they're going to think about Super Bowl, you got to think division first. Mm-hmm. Especially the way the playoffs are now set up with those 7 teams and only one gets the bye. And that's such a huge advantage. Although Washington did go into Detroit last year, who had the bye and pulled off a huge upset. But still, the bye is a big deal. So what's it going to take for Washington to close the gap on Philly?
Well, I think they're starting to. You mentioned what they did in the offseason. getting Laramie Tunsil, drafting Josh Connerly, beefing up that offensive line, being able to move their left tackle to left guard. They've gotten stronger up front. That's certainly going to help because they had a lot of trouble. Those last couple of weeks, we had no run game. The only run game we had was Jaden running for his life and, getting a 9-yard scramble on 4th down for a first down. So that's going to help, obviously, as well as helping him getting a little bit more time to throw the ball. But their problems were on the defense side. The defensive line was not very good. They released a franchise favorite, one of the last remaining, Skins draft picks, in Jonathan Allen, for a cost-cutting move. You could save $17 million and find a way to, add to it. They've added a lot more size up front, but they don't have a dominant pass rusher. And they let their leading sack guy, Dante Fowler, I think he signed back with Dallas maybe. They let him go, mostly because he was undersized. And looking at this draft, they were targeting players that could handle the run and the pass. They didn't want a guy like Mike Green coming out of Marshall, who's 230, 240 pounds. They didn't want a James Pierce out of Tennessee because they're a pass rush specialist. They wanted somebody who can play all 3 downs, and they haven't filled that yet. From what it seems like, they've added a lot of size, but no one is kind of scary up front. And then they're still working on their secondary. We love the fact that they picked up the corner from Ole Miss, Trey Amos, because AJ Brown roasted them in all 3 games. Whenever Philly needed a first down or a touchdown, they could just toss it up to AJ Brown and he would make the play. And for as good as Lattimore was in New Orleans, Marshawn Lattimore was not good in Washington last year. Now, there's a lot of talk that his hamstring was still bothering him, but they don't have anyone who can compete against, some of the weapons that Philly has. So, I certainly think they've done some things. The NFC East is really loaded with pass rushers now, with what the Giants did, with what Philly has continued to do and even did in the draft. And then they never could stop Micah Parsons for the last 4 seasons. So they focus on the offensive line to help that. And then they're still kind of retooling the defense. But we don't have any pass rush, anyone that scares you out there. So that still is a need.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Giants. It feels like they're retooling their roster with Philly in mind. The moves that they've made along the defensive front, they're going to have one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. I don't know if they're going to be able to score any points when they get the ball, but they certainly have made a conscious effort to just not get the ball run down their throat and to be able to get after the quarterback. Can Washington stop the run? Because AJ Brown, as great as he is, I still believe that if you're going to stop Philly, you have to work through Saquon Barkley. You got to be able to take that away first. Can Washington stop the run?
Well, that's been the focus of the offseason because the answer to your question was no. Last year they couldn't. Saquon torched them. And that's partly why they let Dante Fowler go. You have double-digit sacks and the team lowballs you and lets you leave town. That basically says you're not fitting our scheme. And they found him to be a liability on the outside. And so they signed Javon Kinlaw, and they're looking at having guys that are over 300 pounds all along the defensive line, including on the edge. And they want to have guys that can set the edge, and they want to push the pocket from the middle, kind of like what Philly does a little bit. They push the pocket up the middle and let their speed guys go around. Commanders don't have any speed guys right now, but the idea is they recognize that the run game, the rush defense was a big problem last year. And so they've tried to, assemble guys who know how to play that.
Yeah. So what do you think is a successful 2025 for Washington? Because they arrived ahead of schedule last year.
Yeah.
Coming off of, what were they, 4-13 the year before?
They were. It's
an incredible turnaround, right? So you arrive ahead of schedule, but that amps up expectations. And I think you made a good point earlier about how maybe they're not ready to be that team every year just yet. So what is a successful 2025 in your estimation?
Making the playoffs. If they barely miss out on the playoffs because, the NFC North has got teams that nobody has less than 7 wins on the season, so they're tough, or the schedule kind of hurts them a little bit. I think fans will understand if they take a little bit of a step back. But yeah, I mean, making the playoffs, I think right now is a realistic, successful season. To go back to back is not something that's happened for the franchise since the days of Joe Gibbs 1.0. So that would be that would be a step up to say, okay. And then another off season with Adam Peters, we call it Adam Peters cooking in the off season is how they do it. And then I think you're looking at, for Jaden Daniels' third season, that's when I think you push all the chips in and say, here we go. This is our chance. Now we're making the run.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I asked this question to everybody to close when we're talking state of the franchise, partly because I'm curious about it, because I genuinely don't know. As a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I know this. The Pittsburgh-Baltimore rivalry is special. There's a dislike of Baltimore among Steelers fans, but there's a respect. But when you start talking about like Cleveland and Cincinnati, there's just dislike. There's no respect. Who is Washington? Who's the team when you think about Washington football that you just simply dislike? You're not necessarily saying, "Oh, I respect them," but I just don't like them at all.
It's Philly. I mean, because everything that they are, it's their head coach, it's his bodyguard, it's their fans. It was impressive to watch them play as a football fan because, I couldn't stand that Super Bowl, obviously, the way they dominated. But their team was it was easy to respect what they had assembled and how Howie has drafted and kind of, you mentioned the Giants emulating Philly. But that's the game that gets the juices flowing more than anything else. It used to be Cowboys, Redskins, but that game hasn't had any juice for years. And so it really has become, especially because of the geographic location of it. A lot of Philly fans like to come down for the game. And so that is a very much amped up stadium when it comes. And when you beat Philly, it just feels that much better because to everybody, anyone that knows an Eagles fan, they run their mouth. So you have to run it right back on, after that game. So that's the one that I get most excited for.
So you're the third NFC team that I have featured here on State of the Franchise. And the answer to that question for all three teams has been Philly. I did Dallas first. I did San Francisco last week. And the answer was Philly, which is interesting, given that they've kind of developed over the last couple of years, a bit of a heated rivalry. Mm-hmm. And now for the Washington Commanders. All right. So we'll see if Philly can sweep the NFC as the most disliked franchise.
And I don't even, it's hard to say, is it because of their success? Or is it more about I think it's a lot more the way they're winning and not because of the football product. It's everything else that comes with Philly that just drives everyone crazy.
Oh, yeah. It's an all the above equation for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. What do you got coming up there at Washington Football Weekly?
Yeah. So we are kind of taking a little bit of a break for the offseason. We kind of catch up as things happen. Yeah. We just did our draft recap, but we'll be starting up again in July when training camp gets going. But, every Wednesday at 8 p.m. is when we get going, and we'll post our stuff or even say like, we're going tonight on our Twitter page to kind of let people know that we'll be going.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah. All right. So for Will Kramer, this is Kevin Smith. This has been our State of the Franchise episode. Join me tomorrow's Call Sheet Daily to wrap up the week. That's what we call our Hot Route episode with me and Pez from Pez's Picks, where we're doing conversations about football and life, big picture stuff to kick off your weekend a little bit early. So I hope you'll join us for that. Until then, have a great day, everybody.